What's going on, everybody? We've got a very, very special episode of the Talkin TV podcast tonight. Chris, I'd say we've gotten off to a pretty good start this year overall as far as content goes. And, dude, like, not just one, but two big interviews in our first month of the year. Like, come on. Come on. I knew we had big shoes to fill, but, like, I didn't think we were going to hit them this quickly just yet.
Well, hey, man, we speak about this a lot on our show. Around the third season is when a show typically hits its stride, right?
Seriously.
So hopefully that's us getting into gear here.
Following the Will and Grace and Friends. Now that I think about it, the season of Friends that I tolerated the most was the season where Monica was dating Jon Favreau, which, if I'm remembering correctly, was season 3. So,
okay, yeah,
how's
there
that
you
for
go.
some TV knowledge for you.
And I'm supposed to be the TV
There
nerd.
you go. There you go.
And we're talking about a lot of different TV tonight, coming from a very coveted network of my childhood.
Most definitely.
You had a relationship with Nickelodeon, although it was different from
I just
mine.
wanted to comment on it real quick, though, that
Sure.
As far as the format of movie goes, the funny thing is that we have maybe kind of talked down on this certain style and format of movies on the channel before, and so at the risk of sounding hypocritical right there, but that doesn't make this experience any less rewarding than it already was, which is, of course, our ability to view the documentary, The Orange Years, and have the extremely high privilege of interviewing one of the co-directors of the movie, Mr. Scott Barber, who we have on camera with us right now. Scott, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this, to dig in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, man.
Dude.
It's our pleasure, dude. We love this movie. I mean,
this is a special movie. This is a really special movie.
I would say it kind of swept me off my feet in the sense where I had really no idea what to expect going into it. Like Dom said, we're not adverse to watching documentaries, but it's not really our cup of tea because I think sometimes just the information dump versus the relaxability of watching it isn't quite balanced. At least for me, that's a bit of my aversion that I've encountered in the past. But honestly, man, I was quickly pulled into this. And so it's, to me, very cinematic in that regard, where I think most documentaries aren't. But before we get there, before we sort of start to unpack the Orange Years, I think it'd be really cool. And also, guys, if you're with us tonight in the chat, thanks for joining. Ask any questions you want. We're going to kind of parlay between our questions and your guys' questions here, and let's learn as much as we can about this film for the next hour and a half.
Absolutely.
But Scott, I want to know, like, what inspired you to first pick up the camera? Sort of, if you could take us through your early years, your history, bring us to the Orange Years, then we can really just dive into this documentary for the back half.
Yeah, sure. Well, I lived in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I was going to school at a conservatory to be an actor. And it was pretty fun. It was a good experience. But Dallas was not really the right town for me. It's a lot of commercial, a lot of industrials, and I'm kind of a weird looking dude. And so I got booked for some voiceover gigs and kind of realized I had a face for radio. And then, what some of us would do, we would just kind of work on our own projects. Like, well, if we're not getting cast in anything, let's just make our own stuff. So we'd kind of, our goal was to be able to cast ourselves in our own movies and then help each other in our own movies and stuff. And I kind of got a passion for behind the camera stuff more, writing the story, creating the story, seeing the whole big picture. I just like that a lot more, and I was a lot better at it. So that's kind of where the love for writing and directing came from. And so as I got older, I kind of started doing it for money, and then said, okay, like now I kind of know how to do this. Let's not go too far into trying to make money. Like I still want to be an artist. So I said, wanted to make a movie. So Adam and I, that's kind of what led us to making The Orange Years.
Yeah, it's funny because, so many people, they think about just trying to get that first movie made as opposed to just just being able to kind of pick it up and do it for money. So kind of walk us through that process, just like what kind of brings in the specific idea to switch from, at the time, just booking a couple of voiceovers and actually getting in film roles to like what gives you that specific kick? Like, what's the moment that you see where you're like, yes, that's going to make me want to actually make stuff?
Well, I was really into making stuff when I was living in Dallas, and I had a really good group of friends, and we were making some pretty cool shorts. There was a guy named Jared Costa that was a really talented director, still a really talented director. We're still good friends. He's in Dallas. And he connected me with a lot of people in the Orange Years too. And then, I got married, I had kids, and then kind of put the dream aside. And I realized I had a degree for this kind of stuff. And I was like, how how am I going to feed my family with this? So my wife and I started a video production business, and we would do anything and everything from shoot corporate videos, shoot videos for mom and pop stuff, music videos for bands, weddings, like whatever it was people needed.
Weddings, I can tell that from personal experience. Big payers is when it comes to fledgling videographer businesses.
Yeah. And what's funny is I didn't like doing it, but it really was preparing me for documentary filmmaking, because you're not in control. You're filming something. I got a passion for filming something really happening, as opposed to, scripting something out, like a passion for filming something real emotion. So we started doing that. And then, as my kids got a little bit older and we established ourselves, just personally, I said, now I'd love to get back to that artist dream, that I had kind of put to the side while my kids were little. And I talked to my wife about it, and she was comfortable with me making a movie, and has been nothing short of super, super, super supportive. Adam and Adam is my co-director on this, and we're childhood friends. So the way that the Nickelodeon thing and the whole documentary thing happened was, Adam and I were watching these shows as little kids. So it was very personal to both of us. And Adam and I had both, we went to different schools and kind of had our own adult lives and reconnected thanks to social media. And he's a really talented screenwriter. And I had a lot of skill with camera work and editing and stuff like that. And we started saying we should make a movie together. And so we wrote some scripts together, and we just kind of got tired of that way of doing it, where you write a script and hope somebody picks it up, and you got to listen to people want to change it. And we said, damn, we should just make a movie ourselves from start to finish, where we produce it, we direct it, we write it, we do everything. And so a documentary was one of the things that we thought about, and we knew we could do it. I say that we thought we could do it. We never had done it before, but we're like, let's just dive in. And so we're like, well, what do we do a documentary about? And so we started thinking about it, and Nickelodeon was a big part of our childhood, and we couldn't believe no one hadn't done a Nickelodeon documentary. And so we said, let's just do a Nickelodeon documentary. And then we thought about it. We're like, but what's the story? How can you can't just make a documentary about a bunch of shows that's all disconnected. And once we kind of found out about Geraldine Laybourne, who's the central figure in our documentary, we're like, oh, that's the story. That's what's going to tie all these shows together. So really the Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story, is really her story, how she helped create Nickelodeon. I mean, Nickelodeon existed before her, but she's the one that made it the Nickelodeon that we all know and love.
Okay, so that explains sort of the editorial choice at the end to sort of cut off at the point in which you did.
Exactly. Because, when we were thinking about it, we're like, a golden age Nickelodeon. Well, that's different to everybody. The golden age of Nickelodeon, I think Invader Zim is one of the greatest shows that's ever been on Nickelodeon, and it takes place after what we're talking about. And some people were like, I think the golden age of Nickelodeon is even before what you're talking about, with the whole Tomorrow People and Black Beauty and all that stuff. So we also wanted to be careful, as Adam and I have gotten older. I hate it when people always say like everyone feels like their time was the best. Everyone always dogs on what's later. And we really both didn't want to do that. So yeah, when we found out about Geraldine Laybourne, that's when we're like, okay, we're not saying this is better or worse. It's kind of like if you did a documentary on like the Ramones, you're not saying that punk rock sucked after them. You're just saying this is just a story that we're telling is about this one band, So we're not saying anything before or after was worse, better, worse, whatever. We're just telling the story of Geraldine Laybourne and how Nickelodeon went from nothing to a juggernaut. At the end of the story, spoiler alert, is when she leaves, but also at that point they were literally on par with anybody else. They weren't an underdog anymore. They were there.
Yeah, and there's kind of an interesting sort of moral conundrum there at the end as well, in regards to her journey, everything that she sort of stood for throughout her entirety at the helm of Nickelodeon, and where she ends up inevitably leaving. Before we kind of jump into that, we do have some people starting to join us in the chat. Stranger Boy, what's going on? Stranger Boy is always bringing up Nickelodeon on our show, so
Yes.
if you ever had a question, Stranger Boy, now is the time. So I kind of want to know. From your personal perspective, what is your golden era of Nickelodeon?
I mean, we kind of talk about the 80s and 90s in this documentary, and I would say my golden era is 1991. That right around there, that's when I was the perfect age. I wasn't a little kid, but I wasn't a teenager yet. It was kind of right in the middle. And 1991 is funny because so much happened that year. Like just not even Nickelodeon, just all over the place. Rock music was going from Warrant to Nirvana. Rap music was going from MC Hammer to Dr. Dre. It just felt like the whole world was changing. And Nickelodeon, that's whenever all of the Rugrats, Doug, Ren and Stimpy all premiered. Also, Salute Your Shorts, Clarissa Explains It All. All of the big shows debuted in 1991. So like that cusp of like late 80s, early 90s, that's my golden era. Doug, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, Salute Your Shorts. Hey Dude, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like that's what takes me back.
Totally, yeah. For me, it's a little bit later, and then for Dom, who's a few years younger than me, of course, even a little bit later. So
Yeah.
I actually thought it was kind of interesting, some of the cameos that you had to sort of color the story of Nickelodeon. One of them being Drake Bell, who you didn't even touch upon his
awesome.
contribution
Right.
to Nickelodeon, which was huge.
Yeah.
But-
Man, Chris, you completely stole the words from my mouth because literally I was gonna ask you the same thing. Just as far as like just the generational gap. Chris and I are from a generation that like for the most part missed all this stuff. Chris was only 5 in 99 and I was like 2. So just as far as like when you do the math as far as how old we are, and that should tell you something about us. But the point being that like we were kind of around for like the latter of that. For as much as the Nickelodeon kind of the we intook. So like I just find it interesting kind of like the generational gap there that like we're still able to take so much away from this documentary, even though it's a time that for the most part we weren't around for, that just shows the staying power of Nickelodeon. And now discovering the inherent underdog nature as well that goes along with that. Like it really makes what they pulled off like really something special.
Yeah, that was our goal. We think of Nickelodeon as almost on par with Disney and all that stuff. And it was just kind of interesting to shine a light on the fact that wasn't always the case. And there's so many things that we take for granted, things like the Cartoon Network, where cartoons are not on, when I was a little kid, it was just Saturday morning. That's all you got. And now cartoons are all over the place, and cartoons are really good now. Back in the day in the 80s, the cartoons were a lot of people are nostalgic for things like He-Man and Transformers, but at the end of the day, all they were was a commercial. Basically, a company would have an idea for a toy, so they would create a show, and the sole purpose of that show was to get people to go buy the toy. And Nickelodeon was what changed that. And now we have all these shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe because of what they did. So it's weird to think of cartoons not not always being the way they are now, but they weren't. And Nickelodeon was a big part of that. And, you know, the slime, Nickelodeon is synonymous with slime. So, you know, we found, you know, You Can't Do It on Television was huge for me, but we found people that were a little bit younger never saw that show. So it's cool to get to show you, hey, if you like the slime and like that, this is where it came from.
Yeah, kind of our connection with that is kind of the slime at the, what is it, Chris? The Nick Awards, the MTV Movie Awards.
Yeah.
So that's our experience with slime. That's what we've seen it a majority of throughout our
Slime
lifetimes.
Time Live and all that. That's where it started for me. I mean, so for me, where I'm coming at for this, because I'm completely sharing the sentiment with Dom, where, you know, all of these early shows I hadn't even heard of. You know, I'm not a Nickelodeon historian, so I started with the Rugrats and I did not look back. I only looked forward. In fact, Ren and Stimpy was a little too over my head for the time, being, I think, one of their more adult shows, or one of the earlier shows to introduce maybe double meanings or more suggestive style content that they did sort of touch upon. So I thought it was, to me, so interesting how, because like I said early in the beginning of this thing, the information was very narratively distributed throughout this thing, where I feel other documentaries, it's very much just so, here's our information. Our main goal right now is for you to get the information rather than to enjoy the viewing experience. But you were able to sort of thread us along throughout this entire journey, beat for beat, getting to know not that they're characters, but almost like they are characters, and getting to see their development and their journey, especially with the lead, who I'm forgetting her name right now, the woman who went to work for Disney, who you had previously mentioned. I mean, very compelling story, and interesting to watch. So I kind of want to know about your approach and your co-director's approach, how you decided to tell the story once you had all the research, and what your goal there was.
Yeah, and again, Adam and I, we came from a screenwriting background. So this was our first documentary and our first feature-length film, but we still attacked it the same way we'd attack a script, where we wanted it to feel, the same way, with a 3-act structure and all that. And we knew that, we wanted to tell a story with forward motion. So that was, I guess, thank you for saying that. And I think that that's one reason why hopefully it does feel like a movie, this, we treated it the same way we would treat any other script. It has to tell a story that moves. There has to be stakes involved. And so we just, the biggest difference we found is there's you write the story almost twice. We wrote the story out before we ever did any interviews, by all of the research that we could do. And we used that to write our questions and stuff. And then after we had all the interviews, then we kind of wrote it again in the editing process. Some things changed. Some things were different. The structure was a little different. But yeah, that was always our goal, was to move it forward like a story. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you mentioned the idea of like two different structures. Like, was there like a previous structure before? Because I think that I've liked about a lot of the more recent documentaries that I've seen, as opposed to like documentaries of old, like the stuff that we watched in school, those PSAs that kind of ruined just that style of storytelling for us.
Yeah.
Just kind of like they're different adaptations. Like, I've seen documentaries that feel like National Geographic, even though they're covering real world issues. I saw a beautiful documentary a couple years ago called Life Animated that was all about presenting how an autistic kid got through life with Disney characters, and it was like had this really impressive animation done with it. Obviously, 2018 was a big year for documentaries, with just based on subject matter alone, with the Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, and Three Identical Strangers, which has one of the most insane stories I've ever heard. Like, so, but kind of like walk us through the process of like where you see the structure of documentaries as having shifted to what they are now, and how if like, do you think this fits into like a previous class of documentary, or do you think it's like starting like its own like something of its own?
And you're asking, do I feel like what is the orange years, or just in general with
just in general,
documentaries
like
change?
Just documentary shifting, and like how the orange years fits into kind of that whole zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think the orange years is different than a lot of documentaries now. And I think one thing is that it is overall pretty positive. And, some people may not like that. We kind of didn't care. Like, we're just, we're going to do what we're going to do. And I think it's easier to take criticism when it's a choice that you made, as opposed to somebody criticizing something and you didn't mean to do it. And, I think there's one trend, when I was in high school, Jerry Springer and that kind of talk show environment got really big. Like, they called it like trash TV or whatever, it was all about humiliating people on TV and seeing horrible people on TV, that were cheating on their wives and all this stuff. And I feel like in a way that's coming back in documentaries. People like to see documentaries that are very scandalous. And I think that can be really good, with something like Blackfish or Super Size Me, shining a light on something that is horrible is great, But I think sometimes they can border on a little exploitive, you kind of get people and you try to exploit them and make people look like garbage so people at home feel better. And we knew that, and I feel like that's a big trend now in documentaries. And we knew that our documentary wouldn't fit in with that. But we were just fine with it, whatever. I mean, this documentary is a celebratory documentary. It's lifting people up that you didn't know about. I think that our documentary was certainly influenced by, Won't You Be My Neighbor? But that documentary, I think Fred Rogers, people knew him, whereas Geraldine Laybourne, nobody knew. So we were trying to shine a light on people that were behind the camera. We do show all the people that were on the Nickelodeon shows, like Little Pete and Ross from Are You Afraid of the Dark and Mark Summers. You do see all the people that were in front of the camera, but we actually show more of the behind the scenes people. And I think that's what I hope people get a kick out of.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated that like a lot. Like that was probably one of my favorite aspects of watching this, was getting to see all of the behind the scenes people.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and like I loved it. Like I'm like, oh my god, like, and that was actually brought up a point that I wanted to bring up later, but just like the creator of Blue's Clues and the creator of Rugrats, because like I was like right there at the butt end of the 90s. So like I just remember seeing those at like the beginning of my memory, like, the Dougs and the Rugrats and the what's it called? Not Ren and Stimpy, but the stuff that came later, like what's it called? Dexter's Laboratory. Not Dexter's Laboratory, not that.
Hey Arnold.
Hey Arnold and Cat Dog. Those are the big ones that I remember specifically from my childhood overall. And then obviously, like I said, later on, I'm a big Avatar guy, but that's kind of later on after the whole thing. But
that's like fourth wave if we're going by the this documentary standards.
That's post Geraldine's Geraldine departing the studio.
Totally. And, back to the positivity thing, before we get too far away from that, I actually think that is one of the strongest aspects of this documentary. Not only because I think there is so much doom and gloom within the genre. I mean, I feel documentarians are pseudo-journalists in the sense that they choose to pick up the camera instead of write the article. So there are a lot of things to expose. Like you've said, I mean, Dom and I both went to film school. We've seen our fair share of groundbreaking documentaries that sort of get behind the fence and infiltrate and expose some heinous activities, which there is a need for. But
Absolutely.
I also do feel that you really service the material and the success it had and the feeling it gave to so many kids by having it have this positive feeling throughout. The celebratory nature of the documentary, I think, really is the reason why it was so gripping. It kept me locked on the screen, whereas I mean there's been a few movies I've seen recently that I was texting, and Wonder Woman 1984 is a perfect example of I couldn't retain attention throughout that thing to save my life. And so I do think that it actually I wonder why that is, and that must be something within the documentary medium that maybe Dom and I, being more on the feature side of things, aren't privy to in regards to that. Because I the last thing I thought of was that being a negative. I actually thought it was a very delightful choice, especially with what I found interesting as well, being people who went to film school, right? My brain sort of is always trying to dissect and see what's going on behind the scenes. The scientific approach almost that these people took to get in the minds of children and to really make content that was not just, to take the parents' ease off and sit them in front of the TV for a half hour and okay, we have like a half hour reprieve, but to really consume them. Like I asked my mom and she's like, yeah, you and your sister, you shouted at the TV for Blue's Clues. You were quite literally playing along with the Blue's Clues. My sister, being younger than me, with Dora, and I thought it was really interesting for you because you do have your, Keenan in there and your Drake Bell, but they don't steal the show. In fact, they actually complement what went on behind the scenes. So I'm curious how you sort of disseminated, because you got a lot of people in this thing, how you sort of disseminated them and I'd say expertly sort of sprinkled them throughout to, again, complement the overall narrative. And was that a tough sort of editing choice there for you?
It definitely was, because what we found was the stars, a lot of them, they were little kids when they were on these shows. So, it's kind of like you could interview a musician and say, what was your influence for this song? And they can tell you this is, well, when you ask someone that's like, what was the influence? How did this show, how did it come about? How can you explain the irreverent nature? And they're like, I was 10. I don't know. And, not only were they 10 years old, they've also done so many other things since. So we kind of knew that the stars would bring people in and make people feel good by seeing them, like that's somebody I used to watch on TV. And it's cool to get their input, but the creators are the ones that could give you that more behind the scenes, like where did this show come from? What was the inspiration? How did you get it off the ground? They could say, kind of do more of the deep dive stuff. And another thing that was really hard for us was we're kind of doing two things. We're telling the story of Nickelodeon, and we kind of looked at it as like a tree. Like the main story is the story of Nickelodeon going up. And then but when we get to an important story, it kind of branches off and we do like a little mini documentary on Double Dare and then like a little mini documentary on. So that was really hard to balance, not doing too much about the shows, but also giving the shows focus. Because we didn't want it to feel like just here's this show, here's this show, here's this show. And another thing that I think, to go back to a point that you made before, how it kept moving. How do we keep it moving and feel lively? I got to give props to a guy named Aaron Beck who did our soundtrack. And I think that's one of the reasons why it keeps feeling fresh. He had to write so many different songs for this because, every time we get to a new chapter, we knew it had to feel different. So it didn't get boring, with a lot of documentaries, you can write 3 or 4 songs and then just mix them a couple of different ways and you're good, But he had to write, it was crazy. It was like 50, 60 songs for this because, whenever you get into, Clarissa Explained It All, we wanted it to feel like Clarissa. When you get to Pete and Pete, we wanted it to feel like Pete and Pete. So he wrote so many songs, and Darren has a really cool band called Pinkish Black. They're really fantastic. They're like kind of stoner rockish, but no guitar. It's really, really cool. So anybody listening, please check out Pinkish Black because there's only 2 guys. It's just a drummer and Darren does keyboards and sings. But they could play with a band like Red Fang, and then they could also play with somebody like Chelsea Wolf. They're just all over the place. But Darren did all of our music, and I think that really helps. Anyway, I know I kind of went in circles there, but yeah, it was. We knew we needed to use both the stars and directors, and that was just kind of I guess the best way we figured we could go about it.
Oh, Dom, I think you're muted out, man.
Damn. Oh man,
We're doing
I
it
actually
live.
did that. I was waiting. I was gonna do that at least once. But no, yeah, that was that. Yeah, you basically folded me into my next point, which is I really dug the soundtrack, like how the soundtrack kind of mixed and shaped in order to like emulate the spirit of each of the different shows. That was really impressive. Now, walk me through the process of like getting in touch with these creators, right? 'Cause these are people who, for the most part, they've gone on to other jobs. They're either higher up or they're kind of like have taken a break outside of the business right there. They're working just different jobs. Walk me through the process of like getting in touch with them and kind of like, is Geraldine the first one that you call, or is she like the next in a series of steps of who you call as far as, who to get in touch with, Walk us through that process.
Adam and I started this by just doing a crowdfund, and you can watch our crowdfund video on Indiegogo. It's so ridiculous. And we had shot nothing. We had no inside connection to Nickelodeon. We just did a crowdfund to get us off the ground. And then we kind of had this moment of like, after our crowdfund was successful, of like, oh crap, now we have to do it. These people entrusted us with our money. We really did just jump in head first, which I think is good and bad. It's good because we did it, and in hindsight, it's great. But in retrospect, it's like, wow, that was really stupid what we did. Because, one, we decided to do a doc about not just a show or a movie, but about 20 years of a whole network. So we knew we were going to have to book a bunch of different people to make this feel right. It's not like, you do a documentary on Home Alone, you get Macaulay, you get Joe Pesci, you get Daniel Stern, you get Chris Columbus, and you're good, and you could get a couple more people. But if you got those 4 or 5 people, it's like, great. But, we were doing like 20 years. We knew we were going to have to get 1 or 2 people from each show. And also, they're not really connected. The people from Hey Dude don't know the people from Are You Afraid of the Dark? And like you said, some of them are still in the business and are super high up, like Drake Bell and Kenan Thompson. And some of them have gone on and aren't even in the acting business. So we were having to cast our net far and wide to get these people. And in the very beginning, it was so tough because we're just 2 guys that have never made a movie before. And will you please be in our movie? But it's kind of like rolling a car. You're pushing a car. It sucks so hard at first, but once you get it going, then you can just kind of push it with your finger. Once we got Mark Summers, it got easier, and then we got Kenan, it got easier. every time we got one more person, like we interviewed a really lovely lady named Elisa Reyes, who was from All That. And she came on board as a producer and was like, I'll help you guys book people. So after we interviewed her, she called a bunch of her friends and helped us book. Once we interviewed Lisa Malamed, who's a fantastic writer for the show Hey Dude, she called Ann Sweeney. We interviewed, these people would call their friends, and it got easier and easier and easier as we went. But it was hard. And we made I'm not a super, I love getting my hands dirty. I'm not a mathematical kind of guy at all, but we had to get out an Excel spreadsheet, and we made a list of everybody we wanted to interview. And then every single way we could get a hold of them. If they had a Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter where we could message them directly, there you go. If they had a manager, an agent, or publicist, we would put that. And then we would just go down the list and try to get all those people. And I was shocked at how many people we got. Hardly anybody said no. As you can see in the doc, a lot of people said yes. There were a couple that said no, but overall, we got more than we could ever want.
And on top of that, it seemed like everyone was very thrilled to be a part of it. I mean, Drake Bell, every time he was on screen, he just seemed to be glowing in a way that I honestly haven't seen him since the classic Drake and Josh episodes,
Yeah. We were shocked at that and it's cool because we're so nostalgic for watching these shows. All of these people were nostalgic because that's where they started their career, so they were excited. They were just as nostalgic as all of us viewers were, just from the other side of the camera. So, someone like Kenan Thompson, who realistically did all that for a little while, and now he's done Saturday Night Live for 5 times as long as he was on All That. There's a writer that we interview, Graham Yost, who was Hey Dude. Now he's gone on to do Speed, Band of Brothers, Sneaky Pete. He's done all these crazy things. And he's like, I would love to talk about Hey Dude. I never get to talk about Hey Dude. So we were amazed that everybody wanted to do it. And what also is interesting is we kept thinking just the rule of numbers. When you're interviewing this many people, you're going to get a couple of bad apples. We knew we're going to eventually run into somebody who's going to be a diva, who's going to be hard to deal with. And we never, ever did. And I think that shows how awesome Nickelodeon was and how great of an environment Geraldine Laybourne built, because she hired good creators who then hired good actors who were all just great people. Kenan Thompson is, probably one of the famous people in our doc, and he was one of the absolute nicest. He was such a treasure of a human being to get to be around, And that guy very well could have been a diva. If anybody deserves it, he does, because he's that big, and he was as the most kind, down-to-earth person I've ever met.
And one thing I thought you really did a good job of showing in this documentary was the culture of Nickelodeon. And I think that what you're telling us about interacting with these people, this producer who, not producer, but she was one of the actors who eventually jumped on your production as a producer. It does, I think, speak to why they were also so successful. It's pretty obvious genuine art usually gets laughed at and gets, shot down, and people can see through the facade. But something that, disingenuous art rather, but something that's genuine obviously goes on to live forever. And look at Nickelodeon and look at this history. So I think you guys, I don't know if that was inadvertent or if the whole point was to also sort of, weave the fabric of the culture. But regardless of if that was a conscious decision out the gates, I think you kind of, and that's the part of the charm that I felt as well. As we're sort of talking here, I'm unpacking what is it about this that made it so damn charming, right? It's the culture really getting to, I felt like I was there. I felt like a fly on the wall. And I think that, whether or not I enjoyed the documentary medium, I've seen quite a few going to film school and obviously being friends with a bunch of, cinephiles and whatnot. But I normally never feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm watching something on my couch or my TV, but I don't ever feel like I'm there. And I think that is something really impressive, honestly, that you guys were able to achieve. So when did you realize you had that?
As we were interviewing the creators, probably after we interviewed 2 or 3, and to kind of go back, this worked out very, it was very kind of lucky, I guess is the word I'll say, the way things worked out for us, because all those high up people, including Geraldine Laybourne, they were some of the very last people that we interviewed. We actually didn't think we were going to get Geraldine Laybourne. We were going to have to make the documentary without her. And she was literally one of the last 2 or 3 interviews we even did for the documentary. So it worked out well, as crappy as it was when it was happening. It worked out really well because then we knew, oh, wow, that's the story. That's the heart of it, is that she let people just create whatever show they want. And I think part of that culture is, now talking about, Disney and stuff like that, I feel like when you have a hit, just recreate it. Something is big, make me 10 of that. The same thing, just make me more of those. And, when people say, I love 90s Nickelodeon, what the hell does that mean? Ren and Stimpy, Doug, Rugrats, Legends of the Hidden Temple, none of those shows have really anything in common. They weren't trying to recreate anything. And I think that's what she did. She found somebody that she knew was a creative person and just let them be creative. Like, go figure, right? Like, that seems like a no-brainer, but nobody does that. You hear about those guys that got hired to do Solo, a Star Wars story, because they were creative guys. And then when they were being creative, they got fired, like, that's garbage. And I think that that's totally the opposite of what she did. And so anyway, we had enough of these creators, like we interviewed Steve Slavkin, who was the creator of Salute Your Shorts, Mitchell Kriegman, who was creator of Clarissa, and Lisa Malamed and Graham Yost, who were writers and directors on Hey Dude. And they were all kind of saying the same thing about Jerry, how she just kind of hired them and let them do their thing, and how they would have these meetings where the high ups would also talk with the very people on the bottom. And we just thought that was fascinating. So it was great that we knew that, so that then when we got to interview the high up people, Scott Webb, Anne Sweeney, and of course Geraldine Laybourne, we knew to ask them about that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna comment that, like, you interviewed Geraldine last.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then that's the moment when you officially figured out, hey, this is our central through line. This is what is carrying us from point A to point B all the way through to the film. That's when you realized that in that moment.
Yeah, well, we knew that the story of Nickelodeon and Geraldine Laybourne's story was going to be that was going to be our through line.
Right.
We just thought we were unfortunately going to have to do it without her.
Okay.
And Anne Sweeney, who was kind of her second in command, did a wonderful job. Like, if we had to use it without her, it wouldn't have been as good because it's not her, but Anne did a great job. And it actually worked out best having Anne and Geraldine there, because we could kind of bounce back and forth between the two of them.
Definitely. Especially how that worked out lineup wise with, like, them on either side of the frame. There's just like a particularly, like, really specific film nerd thing right there.
Yeah.
But yes, hold on. I wanted to give a quick shout out to my friend Adam, who just came into the chat, saying, yes, give creators more creative freedom. Everything is cookie cutter, tries to pander to an audience with different tastes. Now, Adam was up at film school with me, and he shares a lot of the similar thoughts as us. And that actually, talking about Geraldine and Anne, and the thing that impressed me the most, which again is something that every time you say it now, it feels trite, but it needs to be being brought up because it's still a fact that people are not as aware of, which is the amount of women who had creative oversight and just how that influenced the art just so directly, as in, like, people literally stating that they had a creative playground. And I think that, what's it called? Specifically, Geraldine, there was one thing that she said in particular at the beginning of the documentary that really struck a chord with me, which was kind of the idea of not pandering to kids, but, like, actually having kids in and actually discussing that. And kind of, like, having that edge to her that, like, really gave her that understanding that, like, a more traditional producer just, like, wouldn't or a CEO just wouldn't have, Like, that was the stuff that, like, really spoke to me, like, right at the beginning and showed, okay, yeah, no, this is going to be something special. There's a reason why this specific decade was so special overall. Just because you had somebody in charge who trusted the right people in order to get the right creative stuff done, but just, like, have that understanding edge, as far as that goes. And it's like you said, nothing there felt the same. And I think that's just kind of a big unspoken part of it.
Yeah, that was something that we really wanted to showcase in this documentary. Is we're all nostalgic for things that happened when we were little kids. And there are certain things that I can totally admit I'm nostalgic for that are not particularly good. The band Poison. When Poison comes on, I smile, and I know completely that Poison is not particularly great, but it reminds me of being with my brother when I was a little kid, because my brother was older than me, and he thought Poison was awesome. and it brings up, it makes me smile, but I know it's just because it reminds me of being like 7 years old and hanging out with my brother. You know, I mean, even the original Transformers cartoon show, it's not particularly good, but
Agreed.
But I still love it.
But I still love it when I hear Optimus Prime's voice. But I can admit, and we wanted to do that. Is this nostalgia or is it something more? And it's obviously, I have my opinion that it's something much more, and that we're going to show you why these shows resonate with people so much. It's not an accident. You know, I think the best things in the best artists make things look effortless. You know, you look at some guitar players and they're just going, and it looks like, oh, he's not even doing anything hard, but he is. You know, it just looks effortless because they're so good at it. And I think that's kind of how this Geraldine Laybourne, when you look at Nickelodeon, it just felt like this sloppy, wild, weird thing that was just kind of almost like a Jackson Pollock painting, like just a bunch of splattered stuff. But when you look at Jackson Pollock or like Rothko, like they just look like these random things, but there's a lot of thought behind them. And that to me is how this Nickelodeon was, this era of Nickelodeon. It looked like something that was just held together by duct tape that was just slapped together, but it actually, there was a lot of thought behind it. And I think Geraldine Laybourne, because she was an outsider, you know, she was a teacher, and the sexism that she faced, she was an outsider. And I think outsiders always have a better, no matter what it is that makes you an outsider, if you're an outsider for whatever reason, I think it just gives you a cooler outlook on life than like people that have had the regular life. And yeah, I mean, she was totally different than everybody else. I mean, this is like 1985, 86, you know, I mean, way different than the regular. We have a clip of the person who was in charge of Nickelodeon before her, and he just looks like your typical guy, you know, a big middle-aged guy with gray hair and a suit, you know, and that's how Nickelodeon felt, you know.
Big Wall Street era there.
Wall Street era. Right, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so you did say something where you just said that you feel it's something more than that. And I do too, because you very much so could have played it a little safe in regards to certain sections of the documentary. And someone in the chat, Stranger Boy, brought up Pete and Pete. And, you know, Pete and Pete does have kind of a creepy character there. And I feel that some documentarians, especially new documentarians, in a fear for not stepping on anyone's toes, just being grateful that you got so many big names attached to your project, might not have been as courageous as you guys to sort of go in and be like, well, it was kind of a little creepy having the guy in all those super tights and accenting it as well as you did. You did it in also a very respectful way, too, that I think young filmmakers, your first feature documentary here, might not have been able to pull off. So I do sense an abrupt honesty in this film, where there was a couple times where you kind of had people talk about, and we almost forgot we were making this for kids, or we were worried if this was a little too much for kids.
Yeah.
And that is, I would assume, a tough decision. But as a director, walk us through that as, you know, your first feature documentary, and sort of kind of doing it in a way that I thought was very tasteful, but it kind of obviously still enriched the experience without, you know, disrespecting the subject matter when you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, that is a fine line. You know, I mean, you want to make people look good. You know, these people have given you their time, but you also want to, tell the truth. You know, I think that there's certain documentaries that are out there that are made by the people that the subject, like the subject makes a documentary about themselves. And I think those are some of the most boring documentaries that are out there. And I think it's like, and this is a lesson I learned on the Orange Years, and I'm using this on my next documentary, is just be upfront with people and say, you know, what's okay to talk about and what's not okay to talk about. So if someone's like, well, I don't want to talk about this, then you as a documentarian can go, then I don't really want to do this doc, you know, then this is going to be a boring doc, you know, if it's going to feel like a commercial. And so, you know, it was weird because we didn't work with Nickelodeon at all on this documentary. We were working with these people. So I did lean on Geraldine Laybourne and Vanessa Coffey, who was the head of Nicktoons, who basically created Nicktoons to help I wanted to be respectful of them and be like, how should we handle this? How should we navigate this? You know, you want to be respectful at the same time. You know, if you give the subjects too much creative control, you're not a director anymore. They're the director, you know? So we just wanted to balance, we wanted to balance it. And I think that we did, and there's certain documentaries too. I think if you're going to go down a dark path, a super dark path, you have to make sure you do it tastefully. I've seen some documentaries come out that are like these bright, shiny doc, and they're like, oh, and also there was this really weird, bad thing that happened. Okay, and back to sunshine. And I feel like that's almost worse than just not even talking about it at all, because you're doing it disrespect by just doing it lightly. And there were some things that we were like, hey, this isn't the documentary to talk about that, so it was tough. And I don't know if we made, I'm happy with the choices we made, whether they're right or wrong. I don't know. I guess that's up to, the viewer, but yeah, we wanted to go where we could and where people were comfortable with going.
Yeah, I certainly think you push this in so many different directions that I just wouldn't have expected. You easily could have clung to the heels of, oh, it's nostalgia, and you're just locked in here to get the behind the scenes footage of some of your favorite feel good childhood loves. But you definitely, and I think you did achieve it in a way that enriched the story while also like achieving all the things that I think a good storyteller should do, where it doesn't then quickly become, destructive towards the people on screen or towards the narrative that you're trying to tell. But you obviously can't turn a blind eye to some of it. And I think that honestly was achieved in a very impressive way. I mean, this is your directorial debut, to be honest. And it kind of blew me away how you were able to, thread that needle throughout the entirety of it. I only have a few more questions here as we're starting to wrap this thing up. And I do want to talk to you, and I'm sure Dom does as well, about your future endeavors as well.
Sure.
But I have a question about the cutoff point, because you could have probably had so much fun diving into, Drake. I mean, Drake Bell was quite literally in this, and Drake and Josh is arguably one of the most coveted, Nickelodeon shows of recent times. And especially with Netflix sort of doing that revival last year where we had a Rocko's Modern Life movie, and then they dropped that Invader Zim film, and that got a whole new buzz. You touched on Rocko's Modern Life towards the back half, but you didn't even get into Invader Zim. And I know it's her story, but do you feel there's a stone unturned because of that? Or do you feel fulfilled? I'm curious.
I think that there's a stone left unturned for sure, because I think that the story of ours is basically how they were forging this stuff. There was no Cartoon Network yet for the majority of our documentary. There was no children's programming, and we take it for granted because it's everywhere now. So the majority of the conflict in our documentary comes from them forging it. They were explorers, if you will. They were going into uncharted territory, and how scary that can be. And I think, then going into once, Dan, I saw that. Yeah. They had competition from Cartoon Network. I think that would be really interesting. What do you do now that there's someone even younger and wackier than you? And I do think that Invader Zim, I was a huge fan. The creator of Invader Zim is a guy named Jonan Vasquez, and I was a huge fan of his as a teenager. He wrote a book called Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, and then he also wrote a book called Squee. And they are not for kids at all. And I think the fact that shows you, and Invader Zim was, of course, after what we talk about. And the fact that his comic was literally called Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. It was very like Hot Topic-y kind of thing. And the fact that they chose that guy shows that they still had some guts, like, hey, let's get the guy that made the comic about the homicidal maniac to make a kid's show, and like you mentioned earlier, Dom, about Avatar. That's a freaking fantastic show.
It's one of my top 10 favorite shows of all time. One of the top 10 best shows I've ever seen.
Totally. And so I think, there's a lot of stories of what happened afterwards and how they navigated, because once they had SpongeBob is Mickey Mouse. He is right there they were legitimately on par with Disney after they had SpongeBob. But then I'd love to, talk about what happened after that, like how do they navigate that? Herb Scannell took over for Jerry Laybourne. What was it like to fill her shoes, and like I said, how did they deal with, now they've got competition. Cartoon Network's doing some stuff that's easily as cool as what you're doing, maybe even cooler. And a funny thing, there's a guy named Fred Seibert. He's not in our documentary, but he's talked about in our documentary because he was one of the guys that created the orange logo for Nickelodeon.
Yes.
And he created the MTV logo. So him and his partner, Alan Goodman, Alan is in the doc, but you see a picture of Fred. Fred Seibert was one of the people that went on to be huge at Cartoon Network. He did Frederator Studios. They went on to do Adventure Time. They did the Castlevania show that's on Netflix now. So I would love to interview him and see. I think Frederator Studios alone could have a documentary. But what was it like for him? He was at Nickelodeon. Now he's at Cartoon Network. What was it like being with the competition? Also, what was it like, for Geraldine Laybourne? Now she's at the competition. She's at Disney. Doug went over to be Disney's Doug, which some people loved it. Some people really hated it. But I think there's a story to tell there of, what was it like to take Doug from Nickelodeon to Disney? Yeah, I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying I think there's a.
Sounds to me like there's a sequel in the works here, is what it sounds like. I don't know if your mind was going there, but damn. If there was ever a market to do documentary sequels, now would be it. While everything's kind of up in the air content-wise, definitely. Like the future of Nickelodeon. What happened when the corporations took over? Right? Because if you notice, they always cut documentaries off at that point, where it's like, oh, there was even more to tell. Like the craziest thing to me about the Wiener documentary is that. Where that documentary chose to end, there was another 4 years of stuff that just happened. All the recent stuff that had happened around that 2015, 2016 time. That documentary didn't even get to cover that. So I would just find that really, really interesting if you guys just happen to be the ones to take that next step forward as far as there is more of a story to tell,
That would be cool. The other thing that Adam and I have talked about a lot is that, we could have easily made, with all the footage that we got, what we had, the same story, into a 4 or 5 part docu-series. I don't know if that's possible now that it's out. I don't know the legality of it, but that's because a lot of these shows could have their own documentary. Just the Nicktoons could have a documentary. So we could easily, just with the footage we have now, without even shooting anything else, we could easily expand it out into a 4-part series. I don't know if anyone would buy it now that the short version is already out there, but I think, expanding what we have and going a little bit later, if that's even possible, I don't know if it is, but I think
all I'm
going
to say as far as that goes is if Quentin Tarantino can do it with The Hateful Eight, and he was planning on doing it with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you guys can absolutely do it. Because that actually led into my next follow-up question was, did you guys have any extra footage that didn't make it into the final cut?
Oh, yeah. There's tons of footage. There's tons of footage that didn't make
Then you
it.
absolutely have enough in order to turn this into maybe a 4 or 5 episode miniseries, that you could put it out. It can absolutely work. Are you kidding me? If there was one thing that just the world of modern media has taught us, it's that with director's cuts and extended cuts and oh my God, Zack Snyder's just a beast in and of himself as far as that goes. It's absolutely possible.
And this kind of ties into, and I'm really glad you kind of went there, Dom, something that I kind of wanted to ask more on the marketing promotional side of things. I'm curious as to how you guys went from, how you went from running a video company with your wife, an AV company, to producing a documentary, getting it in front of the eyes and ears. It's obviously got incredible reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of people have seen it. With that extra footage, if you guys are still at the crowdfunding stage, there's always the opportunity to do a Patreon or a YouTube channel and sort of crowdfund the next documentary as well. But I'm curious as to how you navigated the waters of an indie filmmaker to get eyeballs on this thing.
That was the toughest part because everything else was what we already knew how to do. We knew how to film. We knew how to edit. It was doing the same thing that we do, just on a much bigger level. It wasn't that scary. And, I kind of came from a punk rock background. So we were able to take the little bit of money that we did and make it go a long way. This was a lot like I played in a punk band and we would tour, the West Coast. And this was really similar to that. We would go to the West Coast and we'd crash at our producer, Bill Park's house and we would just work all day. And we had that DIY ethos and it was really fun. And then editing it was really fun. I would stay up for 2 or 3 days straight, just going through footage, watching it until my brain felt like it was bleeding, but it was always fun. all of it was fun. It was so much work, but it was so fun because we had a passion for it. But then when it came time to do all the business side, that was something I knew literally nothing about and have no desire to really know about. I'm not a business guy. I love filming, editing, writing, all the fun stuff. So that was what was really difficult. And also I had no idea. I had no idea how to do it. You know, I know how to film stuff. I know how to edit it. I just had to learn how to do it a lot better and on a bigger scale for this. But, we had a lot of ups and downs with that whole process. The film debuted in 2018 and it just now came out this last fall. So obviously there was a lot that we went through. But we got it out. And luckily, we found a distributor, Gravitas Ventures, who picked it up and they've been the ones to do all of that, So it's just finding someone that you trust. That's when some people say, did you feel like you were letting go of your baby when you let other people film it or edit it? The whole making the film, I never felt like I was letting go of my baby. I always felt like I was giving my baby a bigger extended family, because Bradford Thomason helped us edit it, Sean Compton and Jacob Halinga, they helped us shoot it. We found people that helped us, and I always felt like they were the right people. It was only when we were kind of in the dark and we were going into uncharted territory. That's when I was like, I hope we find the right home for it, because it's not just about one. I hope we find a home, but also if we can, I hope we find the right home. You talked about being in a band, it's not just about getting a record label. You want to get it on a record label that makes sense for your band. We wanted to be with somebody that understood our doc. And Gravitas Ventures, they had just put out the Ren and Stimpy doc, so it kind of made sense. And I think if anyone hasn't seen it, please watch that doc. I think it's good. It's totally different than ours. It is super, super. It's just a fantastic doc, and it does get into a lot of the really dark stuff that I didn't feel was really the place in ours.
Totally. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Thanks for being so candid about sort of that process. Cause I'm always curious, like, everyone always leaves that out of these types of interviews. And I want to know like sort of the knit and grit, you got the thing done. Now you gotta, you're still in the trenches. You still got to get this thing in front of people. So yeah, Dom, did you have sort of a final comment question here before we jump into the future?
My only last question really was, so you mentioned obviously the distributor, but like where can people find and watch this movie just in general, Because like I said, I mean, you don't think of documentaries as being the ones that get recommended, but like if given a chance, like I would definitely recommend people, while they're in kind of the slow period of January where there really isn't that much new to watch right now. People are just mostly just bracing and catching up for like the latest onslaught of Disney, material with the MCU making a comeback this year. So like where can people find this movie in order to watch it,
So, Gravitas Ventures, they've done a great job of getting it almost anywhere. If you want to stream it, rent it or buy it via streaming, I mean, it's everywhere. Amazon, iTunes, Vudu, Redbox Digital, which is a thing, Google Play, YouTube, all of them. Fandango, I might have already said that. Anywhere you can stream and rent video, it's there. You can also go to Amazon and get a Blu-ray or a DVD if you want physical media, which I think is still a pretty cool thing. So that's where you can watch it now. And then, they're going to continue to get it in more and more places. Obviously, eventually we want it to be on Hulu, Netflix, or Amazon Prime where people with a subscription.
That's the dream right there.
That's the dream. And so, that usually happens a little bit later. So that'll happen. But right now, and the price just went down. You can rent it or buy it for not very much money on all of those platforms. So however you stream and rent videos, it's probably there.
Got it. Do you have any plans for if after you guys, whatever your next project is, are there any ideas for like a feature, like a fictional feature down the line?
Oh, big time.
All right. Awesome. I'll be
Big
keeping an eye out for that, dude. I'm always looking for new talented filmmakers. And like, I'm not going to say that like the most recent batch has not impressed me because like I said, your guy, just as far as those goes, your Alice Garlands, your Corey Finleys, but like, what's it called, your Safdie brothers. I don't know if you've been keeping up with like a lot of the newer filmmakers, but like I would definitely like be interested to see what what's it called, what you and Adam do going forward, just as far as that goes, because you guys showed like with this movie you have a real knack for talent. You really understand the filmmaking process. You really know just like the right people to hire, which again is such a crucial part, and let's be honest, is not talked about enough when it comes to just filmmaking in general. Overall, just the collaborative sphere. So much of filmmaking is just getting the right people in order to carry your vision to life.
Yes.
Overall.
I completely that would be my advice, is be honest with yourself and know where you're strong and where you're weak, so that where you're weak you can get people that are strong. And that helped me so much with this. You know, we worked with a really talented cinematographer, Sean Cawthon, on this, and I learned so much about cinematography from him. And I worked with a really talented editor, Bradford Thomason, who has he had edited a bunch of documentaries before, Rocket Fire Explosion, Glow, Jasper Mall. So he brought a lot of skill there, and I learned so much. And then, you know, I mentioned before Darren Beck, who did our soundtrack. And luckily I knew a lot of cool people with the kind of weird life that I've lived. I knew a lot of weird people. The guy that did our artwork is a guy named Justin Harder, who he's most famous for the end credits for Deadpool.
Oh,
he
nice.
Did those.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Is he also who did the animated shorts scattered throughout it? Sort of the original animation that you had going throughout the documentary?
Yeah, 'cause you had a decent amount of that throughout.
So thank you for bringing that up. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that brings so many points that I've brought up in the past here. So another guy that I knew that was in my first band I was ever in when I was 15 years old, he is a really talented animator, and he was really influenced by Spumco, the people that did Ren and Stimpy and stuff like that. And he had a style kind of like that. And so I reached out to him and I was like, we're good friends. And it was so great to get to work with my friend, but I wasn't working with him because he's my friend. He literally was. I would have hired him whether he was my friend or not. But the fact that he was my friend made it better. We have 3 or 4 sections where, you know, we need to show something that's happening in the past that there's no B-roll to support it. So he animated it, and and I think it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
He did such a good job. And then the funny thing is, you know, Darren did all of our music, but there was one part where I had a really specific sound that I wanted for the music. I really wanted something for Pete and Pete. And Pete and Pete, for people that maybe don't remember, it had a very indie rock feel to it. It Dinosaur Jr., Jesus and Mary Chain.
Yeah, shoegaze, yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It had a big shoegaze kind of feel. And I wanted something that sounded like that. And Jeff, who was in a band with me back in the 90s, who was doing the animation, I was like, let's go back in the studio together, man. It's been like 20 years. And we did. We recorded a song. So when they talk about Artie, the strongest man in the world, the guy you were talking about that was kind of a creepy character, that's me and Jeff. we recorded a song there. So it really was, it was great to just get to all these artists that I knew, like whether they were visual musicians, whatever, we all were able to come together. And it really felt like kind of like being in a band in a weird way. Like we all just kind of came together to make this cool thing. And then, so I hope I answered your question, but again, what was the question there? I think I answered it.
Yeah, just looking towards the future, man. What can we expect from you and Adam?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of the people that are working on this doc have had other cool things come out. You know, Sean Cawthon, he did a documentary called Netflix versus the World, and Sean was our cinematographer, and he's also a director. He directed a really cool documentary. I don't know if you saw. This isn't by Sean, but there's a documentary called The Last Blockbuster that's out there.
I've heard of it.
It's about the last blockbuster. Well, Sean directed a documentary called Netflix versus the World. And for people that liked the last blockbuster, I would urge them also to watch Netflix versus the World, because it's a good companion piece. The same way our documentary is a good companion piece to Happy Happy Joy Joy, the Ren and Stimpy doc. If you want more about Blockbuster and what went wrong, like why were they not able to keep up, watch Sean's documentary. If you watch the last Blockbuster and want to know more about Blockbuster, watch that. And then I'm currently working on a documentary about the band Guar, and that's just been a absolute dream come true for me. I was talking about animation in the 90s, I was a big fan of a show called Beavis and Butthead.
Who wasn't at the time period?
Okay. And that's where I first found out about Gwar, was from Beavis and Butthead. And I think Gwar is one of those things a lot of people kind of know about, but they don't really know the whole story. And, they're fascinating. They're so fascinating because they're not even really a band. They're more they have more in common with like Monty Python or a traveling circus than with like, say,
so more
Slayer.
Of a troupe than a band, really.
Yeah.
And ironically, they spray liquids. I don't know exactly what it is, but something similar to slime on their audiences. We have this theater up by us, Scott, called the Chance Theater, which is considered a historic establishment in New York where we live. And so every time Gwar comes through, they spend a day or two bubble wrapping and sort of tarping over the entire Chance. And I actually used to intern there, and I helped do that because if they damaged the building, they were liable to get like sued from the state or something, because it's like, sort of it's got historical value. So I'm no stranger to Gwar. That's hilarious. I'm excited to see that documentary.
And it's real cool that, it's one of those things that there's two things that I think are funny that they've had in common with my two documentaries. Is one, like you said, I got slimed in the Nickelodeon one, and I certainly got slimed during the Gwar one. I guess that's like my thing, which is kind of scary about where the future may take me there. But, Gwar is something that I think the same way people took Nickelodeon for granted, I think people take Gwar for granted. It's this, that's that crazy band that wears costume. They're kind of like Kiss, but on acid, and they spray you. But there's so much more to it than that, and like you said, they're the guys that get there at 10 in the morning and start getting ready for that show, because it really is more like a little play. It's a band, but they put on an actual live show. So they have to get there and do the set. And the way they have the spew, it's like this elaborate rig that they've created, and they put it all together. And, the guys that make those masks and the costumes, they're every bit as much a member of Gwar as, say, the guitar players are, which I think is really fascinating. And I'm really excited for people to see this documentary, because I think my goal with that is I wanted to make a documentary that didn't feel like a heavy metal documentary at all, because that's really not what they are. They play metal music, but there's so much more than that. There's the satirical element. They're almost like Spinal Tap, where they're making fun of metal every bit as much as they're celebrating it, which I think is really interesting. And so I would say sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not into that kind of music. And I say, it doesn't matter. Like, my goal is I want to make a documentary that even if your favorite artist is Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber, you're going to like this documentary, because not even because of the work I'm doing, just because of the crazy life these people have led. It's just a beautiful story.
Yeah, and you definitely tapped into what I think I would describe them as, definitely misunderstood, sort of the outlier of their specific scene. And is that you and Adam, or is this a solo venture of yours?
This one, I'm the sole director of this one. But a lot of people from the Orange Years are working on Gwar. Bill, our producer, is working on that. We have a great producer, Tommy Avalone, who I didn't get to work with on the Orange Years, unfortunately, because he was working on another doc that was kind of similar. But I've been a big fan of Tommy's for a long time. He directed a really cool documentary called I Am Santa Claus. And Tommy's from New Jersey, so he's probably maybe not too far from where you guys are. But he directed I Am Santa Claus. That's a documentary about what dudes that play Santa Claus do for the other 364 days. And Mick Foley is in that. The professional wrestler Mick Foley. He's in that. And Tommy also, he directed a documentary called The Bill Murray Stories. That's all about, everyone has these weird urban legends of like, oh, I walked into a bar and randomly Bill Murray was the bartender, or I was playing kickball and randomly Bill Murray showed up and just started playing kickball. There's all these weird urban legends of, people that just see Bill Murray out in their life. And so he did a fantastic documentary about that. So I'm really lucky to get to work with Tommy on that. There's a really, really cool team that we've assembled for the Gwar doc. I think people are going to really like it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, definitely looking forward to it. Cannot wait to see it. But overall, Scott, thank you for tuning in tonight. This was absolutely fantastic. Again, people, for those of you who are just tuning in for right now, the documentary is called The Orange Years, a Nickelodeon Story. And as Scott just said, it is available pretty much anywhere for rent. Amazon, YouTube, Google, hopefully soon to be on Hulu and Netflix. That would be the absolute dream as far as where this documentary kind of belongs as far as what's it called? Just as far as the overall quality. It really is special, and I really do think that a lot of people can benefit from watching it, which, again, who knew I'd be saying that about a documentary to kick off 2021? But hell yeah. Scott, thank you for coming here, as always. Scott, where can the good people find you on social media? What's your social media presence like?
So I don't have one. I don't. It's just I'm weird and I don't do social media. But I do. Me and Adam manage the Orange Years social. So I am on social media just under the Orange Years. So
got it.
You can find us Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find the Orange Years. And the Orange Years is our Instagram is the most active. We do giveaways from time to time and we show clips and stuff like that. So if people want to follow us on the Orange Years, that's at the Orange Years on Instagram. That's the best way to find updates about the movie.
Got it. Definitely. So people follow the Orange Years on Instagram overall. And if you get a chance, once the movie is out and available, which it should be, go and watch it. Chris, where can the good people find us on social media?
Yeah, guys, we are everywhere that matters except for Twitter, because we really just screw Twitter.
Screw Twitter.
So at Talkin TV Podcast, as you can see next to Scott there on Facebook and Instagram, go and follow us. Check us out. We post daily. So if you guys want content, if you guys want to talk about movies with us, if you guys want to just join an ongoing conversation about everything that is film and TV, that's where it's happening. And we'd love to see you there. As well as on youtube.com/TalkinTV. Again, Talkin spelled Talkin, no G. We post 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And it's 2021, guys. We are in our 3rd season. We might even be upping that ante. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. So now would be the time to subscribe. Hit that like button if you're enjoying this video and other content of ours. And of course, turn on that bell so you never miss when we post a single video or go live. Lastly, I'm putting out some music this year, getting back in the saddle. You can find me at Christian Ivanko. I will link the spelling to that down in the description because I know it can get messy with last names. So go check it out, guys. I'm on all social media that matters. I guess I'm on Twitter, but social media that matters. And so follow me. I'm putting music out and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. It's been an honor and a blessing to get to know you guys in more of the commentary realm, but music was my first love and I can't wait to share that with you all again. Dom, before we jump out of here, do you have a final message for the people?
Only that they can follow me on my personal @MovieNerdReviews. It's I don't really post much there anymore because pretty much everything I do now is for Talkin TV, but I still like to post occasionally. So I'll sometimes put up a picture of a chair or when I get a haircut. That's about the only time that I post nowadays. But seriously, props once again. Round of applause to Scott for being an incredible guest. Again, people, watch The Orange Years. It's an incredible documentary. So from myself, Chris, and Scott, as always, watch more fucking movies and TV, people.
Yes.
See you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.
No problem.